Capturing sharp photos in street photography can be quite a challenge, especially since we have no control over the environment. There are so many moving objects and the scenes change so unpredictably fast that you barely have time to react, let alone nail your focus. And even though I personally don't over-obsess about camera settings like shutter speeds and aperture, there is one thing I try to nail, and that is focus. Over the last few years I have tried different approaches, and after countless trial and error, I have managed to discover what works and what doesn't. So in today's video, I want to share with you 3 focusing techniques that you can use to consistently get sharp photos even in chaotic situations. We will start from more beginner-friendly techniques and we will move to more advanced ones. Each approach has its own pros and cons and neither one is perfect, but by the end of this video you will be able to pick and choose the one that best works for each situation. And a quick note, all these methods work with any camera, so you shouldn't have any problem trying them out. And before we continue, smash that like and subscribe button, especially if you want to see more videos like this. Alright, without losing any more time, let's start with the first topic of the day. Before we jump into the focusing techniques, it's important to understand some of the most important autofocus modes first. There are 2 main types: Autofocus Single, which usually locks on focus and that's the end of the story, and Autofocus Continuous, which continuously adjusts focus. The rule of thumb here is that you would use Autofocus Single to shoot static objects like buildings or architecture, and Autofocus Continuous to shoot moving subjects. Many street photographers swear by using Autofocus Continuous, but it never quite worked for me. First, because I'm a control freak and I want to know exactly where my focus is locked at every time, and secondly, because Autofocus Continuous, it doesn't guarantee that you will be tracking the right subject at the right time. I usually like to shoot in very busy areas with a lot of moving subjects, and that increases the risk of having my camera locking on the wrong subject. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say I want to keep focus on a subject that is closer to the background and I want to use someone that would be closer to the camera as foreground to frame my shot. The moment someone would walk in front of me would make the camera to lock focus on them, ruining my shot. Another reason I don't like to use Autofocus Continuous is because you may end up in a situation that the camera is hunting back and forth trying to adjust focus. When that happens and you press the shutter, you will end up with a completely blurry photo. It doesn't happen so often, especially with nowadays cameras, but when it happens, it can completely ruin your photo. In general, for the type of photography I'm doing, I have a lower hit rate with Autofocus Continuous, and for this reason I usually stick with Autofocus Single. When I want to track a moving subject, I usually use the tracking mode of my camera via a dedicated button I have set up. With this method, I can specify explicitly which subject I want to track and avoid the aforementioned issues. There is no right or wrong here, and I'm not going to encourage you to use my method just because I'm using it. The key here is to use both Autofocus Single and Continuous and see what best works for you. When starting with street photography, you will mostly rely on autofocus to do the heavy lifting for you for capturing sharp photos. And the best way to do that is by using a large autofocus area and let the camera make the decisions for you. With this method, basically you specify within which area your camera should try to achieve focus, and it will automatically lock onto the subject that is most detectable within that area. It takes the decision making away from you and lets the camera do the work for you. This is one of the simplest ways to achieve focus, but also one of the least accurate ones, because you let the camera decide for you. This method usually works best when there is only one subject in your frame. In complex scenes with a lot of moving subjects, it sort of becomes like a gamble because you can't guarantee that the camera will be focused where you want it to. But in scenes where your subjects are along the same depth and you're using big f-stops like f11 or f16, this will be less of a problem. It is also important to mention that the quality of this autofocus method heavily relies on the performance of your camera. For example, with the newer Sony cameras which have state-of-the-art autofocus systems may perform better than others, meaning that they can focus faster and more accurately. When using this technique, I would suggest not using the entire focus area of your camera, since that increases the chances of your camera focusing on the wrong place. Instead, use a smaller focus area and move it to a position where you expect most of the action in your scene to be. Then try to frame your shots around this area. Moreover, since in street photography most of our subjects are people, I usually try to set up my camera to prioritize focusing on humans rather than objects. For example, on a Sony camera you can do that by turning on subject recognition and setting the target to humans. Other camera brands offer similar settings, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Last but not least, it is also worth mentioning that using a wide autofocus area works well with both Autofocus Single and Autofocus Continuous, so you can choose the one that you prefer. Usually someone starting with street photography would rely on this focusing technique, and it's a great first step for beginners until they become more comfortable with the cameras. But I have to admit, I still use this technique when I'm shooting simple scenes and when I'm having a lazy day and I don't care so much about capturing the perfect photo. So whether you're just starting with street photography or you're just having a lazy day, using a wide autofocus area will do the trick. As your skills improve and you get more comfortable with your camera, you will naturally want more control over your focus. And that brings us to a slightly more advanced technique, which is using a smaller focus area for increased accuracy. This method relies on using spot autofocus. Basically, you put a focus point right on your subject, lock it in, and then you recompose the scene by moving the camera. This technique gives you more control because you decide exactly what the camera focuses, but you also sacrifice speed. It gives you more accurate results because now you decide exactly which subject to focus on, but it also makes you slower. It's not ideal when you need to react fast because you always need to recompose your shots. It's important to mention that this technique only works with Autofocus Single. With Autofocus Continuous, your camera will try to refocus while you're reframing and you will end up missing focus. There are various spot autofocus sizes you can use, but in general, the smaller the area, the more accurate your focus will be. That also means it's easier to miss focus if you or your subject accidentally moves. I usually prefer to use a medium-sized spot area. In general, I love using these techniques during complex scenes and when there are multiple subjects. This way I have more control over which subject or part of the frame should be the sharpest. The great thing is that you can use spot autofocus even for simple scenes. For example, if you are fishing for a scene and your subject isn't yet in the frame, you can predict where their position will be when they enter the frame and lock focus on that spot. Then all you have to do is recompose and press the shutter once the subject is in the desired position. I love using focus and recompose, and it has become a habit since my early days of street photography that I just can't shake off. Back then autofocus wasn't as good as it is now, so I had to rely on spot autofocus to achieve sharp results, and it quite stuck with me since then. As your photography skills grow, I'm sure that sooner or later you'll start using this technique too. Once you spend some time shooting and you start looking for more control and consistency, eventually you will come across the holy grail of focusing, which is manual zone focusing. This is the focusing technique I believe works best for street photography. It was used before autofocus systems even existed, and there is a good reason some of the greatest street photographers still prefer it. With zone focusing, you have full control of your depth of field, and you can achieve sharp photos from simple to more complex scenes. Especially when working with scenes that have multiple subjects or you're using more advanced techniques like layering, zone focusing is a technique that will give you the optimal results. Figuring out how zone focusing works sounds intimidating, but it's actually not so complex. Let's have a look at an example. I will be using a manual focus lens with distance scales to show you how it works. First, you have to set your aperture. Let's choose f11 for this example. Then all you have to do is decide your focus distance. For example, when focusing at 3 meters, your zone, or basically your depth of field, will be between 1.5 meters to infinity, as indicated by these lines. It is important to mention that depth of field works like a gradient and not like an absolute scale. That basically means that it indicates acceptable sharpness and not absolute sharpness. In a previous example with a depth of field from 1.5 meters to infinity, that means that subjects closer to 1.5 meters or infinity will be less sharp compared to subjects at the focus point of 3 meters. But the sharpness will be acceptable and good enough. Just keep in mind this when you're photographing or when you're reviewing your photos. The key thing to understand when shooting with zone focusing is the distance between the camera and your subject. This way you will know where is your sharpest point before you even take your shot. And there are a couple of ways you can practice that. One is to measure distances like 1 or 2 meters, so you get a feel for how far those really are. You can easily do this at home. Then when you're out shooting, practice on static objects like street signs. Try to estimate the distance, move around, and adjust the focus ring at different marks like 1 or 2 meters. This will help you figure out exactly where your lens gives you maximum sharpness. After a while, you will develop a pretty good sense of what 2 or 3 meters look like, and it will become like a second nature to set your focus distance for getting sharp photos. Zone focusing is my favorite way to shoot complex and layered scenes where the subjects are spread apart. The key to achieving that is by maximizing your depth of field, which you can do by focusing on the hyperfocal distance. Its value depends on your camera, the focal length and the aperture you're using, but there are a lot of online apps that can help you figure it out easily. For example, when shooting with a full frame camera using a 28mm lens at f11, if you set your focus point at around 2.3 meters, everything between 1.2 meters and infinity will be in focus. That means you only need to make sure your main subjects are more than 1.2 meters away, then everything else in the frame will look acceptably sharp. It is also worth mentioning that when it comes to street photography, zone focusing works better with wider focal lengths like 28 or 35mm. Anything longer than that and then the depth of field becomes too narrow, even for bigger f-stops. The reason I love zone focusing so much is because you can speed up or slow down your photography as much as you want it. If you want the fastest focus possible, then set the focus to the zone you are most comfortable with and then just make sure the subjects are within that range when you're photographing. This way you don't have to think about focusing at all. You can shoot instantly and react to moments as they happen. On the other hand, if you want to slow down and enjoy the process of photographing, zone focusing can help you with that too. For example, there are some days that I really want to take it easy and enjoy a slow walk with my camera. During those days, I will use the viewfinder to carefully adjust the focus distance and take my time until my subject looks crystal clear. Manual zone focusing takes practice and it may seem intimidating at first, but it has the power to completely transform your photography. It not only gives you full control over the sharpness of your photo, but it can make you more intentional about how you shoot and can help you enjoy the process even more. Now that we have analyzed all the focusing techniques, let's see how each one performs and when you should use them. So first we have the autofocus that is using a wide area. This is usually a more beginner-friendly technique and its results can be pretty fast, but also be mindful that it depends on your camera's performance. And usually for this technique you get lower accuracy because usually your camera is deciding for you where to focus. And this method is mostly recommended for shooting simple scenes with just one subject or when you are having a lazy day and you don't care about the results so much. Then we have the spot autofocus and reframe technique. This is usually a more intermediate technique and you will be mostly using it once you become more comfortable with your camera. Its speed is much more slower because you always need to focus and then reframe your scene, but its accuracy is much higher because now you decide where to focus on. This technique is mostly recommended for more complex scenes where you have multiple subjects. Last but not least, we have manual zone focusing, which is a pro level and more advanced technique. This is the fastest technique because now you can manually specify the depth of field and you can just focus on shooting within that zone. It has the best accuracy out of all the three methods because now you're in control of the depth of field and the zone you're focusing on. And it's ideal for photographing in any kind of scenario. From shooting simple scenes to more complex ones, manual zone focusing will give you the optimal results. As your photography skills grow, you will eventually be trying all these methods and you will be able to find the one that best works for you. I'm also curious to hear what other focus techniques you like to use and which one best works for you. So don't be shy and drop a quick comment below. And that's all for today, folks. Happy shooting and see you again next time.